if you love my channel and would like to show your support, please click on the link below this video and become the patron of the Ushanka Show. For as little as $1, you can help us grow and create the new, interesting videos about the life in Soviet Union. Hello comrades, and welcome back to Ushanka Show. Well, we have another question, this time from Robert. He sent me through email, and it's a pretty long question, but it's a good one, so I'm going to read the whole question and then we're going to try to answer. So, hello comrade Sergey. On Reddit, and I don't use that social media, I honestly have no idea what people do there. It seems like it's quite a popular social network, because once one of my videos about KGB just took off like insane, and I just started asking questions, people who commented under my video, and apparently someone posted a snippet of my video in the Reddit subreddit about the jokes about KGB, and it created quite a traffic, so I guess it's a pretty popular social network. But anyway, on Reddit's propaganda posters subreddit, so I guess there's a topic about different propaganda posters where subscribers discuss and sometimes poke fun at historical propaganda posters. A common thing with the Soviet posters we come across is a claim that the Soviets were all about peace in the world, with the Americans being imperialists, with the proletariat being drafted to fight in overseas wars, with their politicians and business classes staying at home getting rich. There is an element of truth to that, of course. Vietnam comes to mind, or at least in terms of what the Americans did, not the Soviets. But of course the Soviets also had campaigns abroad, like in Afghanistan. So this makes me wonder, to what extent did people within Soviet USSR really believe that they were a side all about mir, which is a Russian word for peace, in the world, and were doing nothing but defending those who did so as well, including your rather large nuclear arsenal? Thanks, Robert. So let's try to answer this question. First of all, let's take a look at the big picture and look back in history. There's two events that I can think of that definitely, like for me and for most Soviet people, and I think for the most of the world, there's two events that definitely point the fingers towards the United States. Is the aggressive imperialists that were pushing the world to the brink of war, or as our newspaper was saying, you know, when you try to if you have embers and you try to get them going into the fire, you blow on them, right? So that was expression that the United States are blowing on a Cold War embers, trying to turn it into the hot war, into nuclear war. And that was so there was Americans that were pushing towards the nuclear annihilation of the Soviet Union, and of course as a result of the annihilation of the whole world. So first event is, we're talking about early 1960s. So 1959, Jupiter ballistic missiles were deployed to Turkey and Italy, and they became fully operational in 1961 in June and November. I just looked it up. So Jupiter IRBM, I know BM stands for the ballistic missiles, IR intercontinental maybe, but anyway, it doesn't look like intercontinental, so that's why they put them so close. So now look at the situation. America places the nuclear missiles right pretty much on the border of the Soviet Union. So who is aggressive here and who is on defense, right? So of course, and at that time Soviet Union, there was a Khrushchev who was the leader of the country, and he of course wasn't happy about it. So what did Soviets do? They sneakily brought their missiles and set up in Cuba. Americans discovered it, and then we almost closed the page of the history of the world, having Caribbean crisis. But look, you know, this is the situation. So when Americans placed the nuclear weapons right on the border with Soviet Union, it was totally okay, because we are good guys and Soviets are bad guys. Now, when the Soviets did exactly the same thing and placed their nuclear missiles right in the underbelly of the United States, suddenly Americans became very, very butthurt and obsessed and, pushing that pretty much claiming they're going to attack Cuba, they're going to attack those missiles because no one does anything like that. So when United States got the taste of the same medicine that they were feeding Soviets, they were not happy about it. But for me, it's just like, here you go, this is what you feel when opposite side does exactly the same thing to you. Treat the people the way you would like to be treated. So if you treated someone by placing nuclear missiles right on the border, don't, act like you're so upset when the opposite side does exactly the same thing to you. So then, of course, everyone pointed fingers at the Soviet Union. Look at those bad guys. They almost started the nuclear war between Soviet Union and United States, and conveniently everyone forgot that in this chess game, its first move was done by United States by placing their Jupiter nuclear ballistic missiles in Italy and especially in Turkey, because Turkey, it's right across, it's pretty much like Cuba and United States. It's right across Black Sea and there's the Soviet Union. So this is the first example when, for me, for example, and for most Soviet people, were obvious that Americans act like aggressors and Soviet people, Soviet country, Soviet Union was on defense. Example number 2. Now we jump a little bit forward into 1983, and exactly a similar situation. United States develops a brand new medium-range ballistic rocket called Pershing II, and they authorized placing it in West Germany in 1983. Once again, nuclear missiles being placed right next to the Soviet Union. So we have agreement with the United States that if United States leave Cuba alone and won't try to change the government there, we will remove our nuclear missiles from Cuba and we'll never do it again. And apparently, I read a little bit about it, Kennedy didn't want to admit it publicly because that will show that America, weakness of American government. But in private, they agreed, because that's what Khrushchev demanded too. Hey, I take my missiles out of Cuba if you take your missiles out of Turkey. But apparently at that time, there were new systems developed and Jupiter was outdated, obsolete missiles, so it made sense to remove them anyway. But Americans did it quietly, without any public relations announcements. They just quietly removed those missiles from Turkey, but they saved their face because they didn't admit, hey, we agreed with the Soviet Union that we're gonna do mutual nuclear missile removal. And this is the thing about Khrushchev that scared actually his own comrades in the government. So he was like a Soviet Trump. He saw the problem and he just, somewhere maybe you need to work with a surgical knife, he just took an axe. Hey, you put the missiles in Turkey, I'll put missiles in Cuba. How about that? And it's really risky gambit, but he won. So this is 2 examples I can think of that definitely, in my opinion, shows that United States were as aggressor, pushing the nuclear envelope, and the Soviet Union was on defense. Now, the second part of this question was about Americans being imperialists and their working class being drafted to fight in overseas wars and politicians, business classes staying at home. I think it really became that situation when draft was canceled in the United States and serving in the Army or Navy, Air Force became volunteers, so people don't get drafted anymore in the United States, only in case of war. It is the case when I talked to a lot of former military service people, and I still didn't find a single person that went to the service because it was his patriotic duty. It's pretty much, or I had no idea what to do in my life. I needed money to go to college. My girlfriend got pregnant. We had no money. I couldn't find a job, so I joined Navy. And I met a lot of former Navy, especially people so far, I didn't find any single person who said, yeah, I consider that as my duty, so right after high school I went and joined military. Maybe in Marines will be higher percentage, because that's like really dangerous job, as I say. Like most dangerous service is probably Marine. Navy, it's Air Force is way safer, and of course people have wanted to get some skills for my civilian life. So now, the way the things, people who's rich people, their children definitely don't go to army, to military service, because there's no reason. They have money to pay for their college. That's the poor kids of the poor, children that don't see future. They join the military service. So right now, it's definitely, I would say, that's the case. Back then, during Vietnam, I mean, we had quite a few characters that became eventually presidents of the United States that didn't get drafted, they dodged the draft. It's one of the Bushes, W, I believe. What I read, that he was conveniently placed to serve in Air Force Reserve or something, so he stayed in Texas. He never went to Vietnam. Clinton, another draft dodger, and Mr. Trump with his feet problems that he even doesn't remember which leg gave him a problem and never could show his x-rays. We got 3 presidents that were, they really good about starting wars in different countries, but they don't want to risk their own assets going somewhere and fight for their motherland. Okay, so this was like a big picture discussion, so now I want to tell you about my own what I recall as being a kid, and what did I think about the situation with who was aggressor and who was in defense in like 80s, I guess, late 70s. It's interesting because I still remember when Reagan won the election in the United States. So I looked it up. It was in November 1980s. So I was 9-year-old, and this is really bizarre. Like, I don't remember what happened like 6 months ago, 3 months ago. I still remember what happened to me in November 1980. I mean, I don't remember details, but I remember reading the newspaper, watching on TV that, there was not much to watch on TV, talked about already. So every evening there's the news program called Time, Время, and it will, for 45 minutes there'll be international news, local news, and sports. So I was actually very happy that Reagan got elected, because Carter was portrayed like a really bad guy, like a military hawk, and there was like talks that maybe when Reagan became president, that we will have less tensions between Soviet Union and United States, and how wrong it was. But I remember I was like, oh my God, thank you. Well, I wouldn't say probably oh my God, because I wasn't religious. But I was happy for Reagan to get elected, because I thought he will stop Cold War, and there will be less concerns about nuclear Armageddon in the world. Another silly detail I remember, at that time, so this is like 1980, 81, I guess, so I was still, 8, 9-year-old, we had this kind of like a challenge called 3 matches challenge. So you ask your friend, what would you do if you had 3 magic matches? So, like wooden matches, every time you snap it, you can make a wish and it'll become true. So you have only 3 matches. And of course, kids like, well, I'll make my first wish to have the whole box, so I'll have 100 of magic matches. He's like, no. Well, you have 3 matches, you can't make any more. What would be your 3 wishes? And that's another detail I remember really, really vividly. My first wish was the peace in the whole world. So it tells you that I was not like horrified. I didn't sleep under bed, expecting the nuclear warheads coming any moment. But I was, as a kid, as a 9-year-old, I was very concerned about the possibility of starting World War III. And at that time, I guess the Persian rockets were kind of in the process of being become operational and being transferred to Western Europe. So there was a lot of noise in our newspapers, on TV, about this aggressive step by the United States. So my first wish, if I had those 3 magic matches, was that please make sure there's a peace in the world, that we don't have a nuclear war. Now you're probably gonna ask me, like, what were the 2 other wishes, and they were really silly, kid style wishes, because that time, of course, if I'll be horny teenager, I probably will have different wishes. But that time, my second wish was so I can live forever, and my third match, that my parents live forever. So 3 magic matches and 3 wishes of the Soviet kid: the peace in the whole world, live forever, and my parents live forever. So forever young, and my parents live forever. So those were my 3 wishes if I had 3 magic matches. But the very first one, the most important was the peace in the whole world. So you could tell that at least me, as a nerdy 9-year-old, I was stressed out about situation in a Cold War. Now, Robert mentioned in his question about Afghanistan. And this is a really good question, because yes, Soviet Union occupied Afghanistan in 1978 or 79, but later on, I believe it was Zbigniew Brzezinski, he published his memoirs, and he mentioned that he worked really hard into tricking Soviet Union into going into Afghanistan. They wanted to create Soviet Vietnam. And since Soviet Union was pretty sensitive about America placing nuclear missiles right at the border of the Soviet Union, all the United States had to do is create impression that they planning to become good friends with Afghanistan government and maybe place the nuclear weapons there. And right away, Soviet Union got all scared, and they moved in and took over Afghanistan. The real reason was, that's what I believe they were saying also in our newspapers, but of course they also mentioned it's our international duty, blah blah blah. And it became total disaster. We stayed in Afghanistan until 1985, I believe, and finally Gorbachev ordered to pull out. We lost like 15,000 troops there, I believe, in that period of time, and of course turned Afghanistan into big mess. And now Americans over there fighting the same people. They used to be freedom fighters, now they're suddenly terrorists. But I want you to think about one little detail. So Brzezinski, I think it was him, Zbigniew Brzezinski. If he didn't lie, and that was for real intent to the United States. Now think about Afghanistan. So they have this big, powerful neighbor, Soviet Union, so big bear, and suddenly Soviet Union, like you have your neighbor breaks in your house, beats you up, take over your house, rapes your wife, whatever, and then another neighbor from far, far away, like, hey, I can help you. I know you're in a bad situation, but hey, there's some money, there's some food, there's some weapons. Fight that guy. You can kick him out of your house. So you now so thankful to your faraway neighbor across the ocean for helping you in this situation. But what would you think if you find out that originally that faraway neighbor is actually convinced the bad guy next door to break in your house and take over it? This is kind of question that's like, man, this is really ugly. When you trick someone to kick, when your friend actually apparently tricked the bad guy to kick your ass, and then he came to help you to kick the bad guy back. But initially that was all his plan and his idea to do that. So I'm curious what you guys think. Please place the comments under this video. But this is my answer about who is, in opinion of Soviet people, was an aggressor during those years. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you later. До свидания. Goodbye.